Mr. Speaker, this is a simple but vital piece of legislation.
At least the Foreign Secretary could claim converts to the cause of a referendum, with Labour and the Lib Dems reversing their previous opposition to a vote. The SNP declined to join the party.
The referendum is a tactic that's being deployed as a means of deflecting support from UKIP, as a sop to the backbenchers. Nobody actually believes the Prime Minister wants to take the country out of the European Union.
But Conservative tensions were never far from the surface. Former Cabinet colleagues John Redwood and Kenneth Clarke were at odds over what Mr Clarke called a fanciful escapist route into isolated nationalism. Mr Redwood said the EU is holding us back. But when it came to the vote on whether to have a vote, the result was never in doubt.
The ayes to the right, 544. The noes to the left, 53.
The arguments over who should vote in the referendum and when spilled over into PMQs.
Why won't he let 16 and 17-year-olds vote? This is about the future of our country. They did in the Scottish referendum. It's their future too.
On the issue of 16 and 17-year-olds, I believe this House should vote on that issue. The Conservative manifesto is clear and my position is clear. I think we should stick with the current franchise at 18, but the House of Commons can vote.
A taste of some of the battle still to come as the bill winds its way through Parliament.
David Cornott taking a look at the EU referendum bill. Well, with me to discuss that and the week's other stories, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by the Conservative MP, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Labour's Emily Thornberry and the SNP's Stephen Gethin. Jacob Rees-Mogg, let me start with you. The EU referendum bill, how uncomfortable a process is this going to be for David Cameron, given that there are some of his backbenchers who aren't going to be happy with whatever concessions he manages to bring back?
Well, I think you've got to divide it into phases. That the first phase, the bill itself, is easy, and I expect it'll probably even get through the Lords without too many difficulties. The second phase is the renegotiation, about which there are very few details as to what's being asked for, and it's the third phase that will be difficult. That will be the point at which we know what's been agreed and people are deciding whether they think it is enough or not, and that's the point at which you will find, not just in the Tory party, but people within one party take a different view on how good the outcome is.
But David Cameron is going to be pushed very hard, isn't he? I mean, there are some on the Conservative backbenches who, for example, would want a real change when it comes to immigration, and that's almost impossible.
Well, treaty change can cover anything. That is in the current treaties can be taken out. That must logically follow. I think in a negotiation it's worth starting out with an ambitious plan and see how far you get.
All right, Emily Thornberry, your party has entirely changed its position, going from being against the idea of a referendum to being in favour of it and voting with the government on Tuesday. How comfortable are you with that?
Well, I think our view is that it's going to happen. You know, we lost the election. We have to come to terms with that. So we lost the election, and so they will push through a vote on the referendum. So we may as well move on from whether we should have a vote on whether or not there should be a decision about whether we should have a referendum, but instead we should be looking at the substance of the referendum. So instead of looking at the process, we have to look at the arguments for and against staying in the EU. And we want to get off the blocks quickly and start arguing in favour of of remaining in the EU.
All right, Stephen Gethin,
yeah.
Why did your party vote against letting the people of the United Kingdom have a vote on a constitutional issue?
Sure, I think there are a number of reasons. Firstly, it didn't meet the gold standard that was set by the independence referendum. You don't have 16 and 17-year-olds vote, you're excluding EU nationals. You know, we had a fantastic independence referendum in Scotland that 85% of the population turned out and voted for. It was a good exercise in democracy. Secondly, and more importantly perhaps as well, is that if you're going to have a referendum, you do it when you're proposing quite a substantial change, as you did with the independence referendum. Now, bear with me.
This is a big change.
Well, not really. I mean, we don't know what the changes are. I mean, so far, from what we're hearing from Europe and what we're hearing from the Conservatives, we're going to have a bit of tinkering around the edges and then we're going to take it to the people. So I'm not sure there's going to be. No, hold on.
Because Jacob's talking about treaty change. I mean, for many countries, if there's going to be a treaty change, they themselves will need to have a referendum. So the chances of us getting treaty change are pretty negligible.
Well, I think you make a very valuable point there, which is if we're going to get treaty change, I'm not sure we will. You need unanimity for treaty change, obviously, and I'm not sure everybody's going to sign up to it. Now, with the greatest respect, David Cameron's done a fine job in losing friends and influence across Europe over the past few years, and I'm not sure anybody's going to be doing him a whole lot of favours during this negotiation process.
All right, let's take a look at one of the issues. There's obviously lots to talk about here, but one of the issues that's floated to the top is votes for 16 and 17-year-olds. Good idea, bad idea?
Potentially a good idea, but a bad idea in this context. That is to say, we should decide whether we want to extend the franchise to 16 and 17-year-olds, and then we should do that if that's the decision we come to for all elections. I think to change the franchise election by election is a very peculiar way of setting up your electoral system. So it may be a good idea. I'm not completely against it, but I think to say, well, this election we'll have it and that election we won't, will just cause confusion. Either 16 is the right age or 18 is the right age.
It'll be really weird because there will be 17-year-olds, 16-year-olds who voted in the Scottish referendum who now won't be allowed to vote in the European referendum. There'll be people who live half a mile away who are friends of those 16-year-olds and they saw their friends voting in the Scottish referendum and then won't be able to vote in the general election. No, and we think, obviously, as you know, we think they should. We don't just think they should just by itself. We think that it needs to be implanted in the education system so that you can run mock elections, you can discuss the issue at school, because if we can get young people into the habit of voting, once they've done it once, they'll carry on doing it. And we think that it's a really important part of the education. I have to say, when I first heard that we were thinking as a party of going for 16 and 17-year-olds being allowed to have a vote, I didn't really get it. But then when I spoke to 16 and 17-year-olds, particularly, frankly, youngsters who'd voted in the referendum in Scotland, and they said they'd had these big debates in school, and you then go into the schools and talk to kids about politics before the general election, you think, yes, that you should include them.
On that point, as somebody who participated in the independence referendum, I think one thing that's very important, 75% of 16 and 17-year-olds who could vote voted in the independence referendum.
Well,